Thank you, Mark Anderud, our wonderful music man, for joining us live all the way from Barcelona to start us off on the right celebratory, warm, and welcoming note. Happy New Year, everybody. I'm Cody Kornak, the Director of Government Affairs for the National Head Start Association, and I have the pleasure of emceeing today's event, the launch of our new report titled Broader, Deeper, Fairer: 5 Strategies to Radically Expand the Talent Pool in Early Education. This report is the product of a collaboration between the HeadStarter Network, the National Head Start Association, and Bellwether Education partners. And of course, it would not be possible without the visionary funders behind it. First and foremost, I want to welcome and thank each of you in the audience for joining us for an energizing conversation today about how we might get from here to there and take action to move workforce preparation forward. For those of you joining from early education programs, I also want to extend a heartfelt thank you for the heroic work that you've undertaken during a historically difficult year. You're in our thoughts every day, and this work is done with you in mind. My first order of business is to introduce Megan Houston. Megan joins us from the House of Beautiful Business, not only as the editor of the report, but one of the brains behind this work. She's today's chat guide. For each of you in the audience, please join in the conversation, ask questions, and share ideas by using that chat function. In the theme of the report, today's conversation is intended to be engaging, collaborative, and idea generating. At the end of today's conversation, you'll also want to head back to that chat to get the link to download the report. Let's start by warming up that chat box, as so many of you have already begun. Please take a moment to say hello, wave hello if your camera's on. If you're willing, turn on that camera and give a warm welcome to all the other people on the line today. Please share in the chat. What is your role? Where are you coming from? What city or state? I'm seeing Alaska, Michigan, Montana, and New Jersey came in earlier today. Welcome everybody from all over the country for an engaging conversation. Now, to truly kick off today's conversation, I'd like to welcome Cynthia Jackson. Cynthia joins us from Start Early, formerly known as the Ounce of Prevention, where she is Senior VP and leads the Educare Learning Network. In my book, though, she's somewhat of a celebrity, having shared some of the most foundational remarks during the Early Childhood Workforce Catalyst, the event that marked the start of this report and this effort this past summer. What she shared then gripped my thoughts, made it onto the header of each page of my notes, and deeply informed the drafting of today's report. It is truly my pleasure to introduce Cynthia Jackson.
Thank you so much, Cody. And I also have to thank Yasmina, the National Head Start Association, the HeadStarter Network, and Bellwether Education partners for inviting me back to provide some opening remarks. And it is truly a pleasure. And Cody, thank you for such a great and warm welcome. Last time I talked about getting unstuck. This time, I want to say, I think we've come unstuck. Today's launch is evidence of a first step in joining together in an organized effort to identify a starting place for addressing the under-resourced early childhood field. We have been great at calling out the inequities of high-quality early care and education for children and families served. And we are great at calling out the inequities in the development of our early childhood professionals. The challenge is ours to address. What must we do to recruit, credential, train, and retain early childhood professionals? Our presenters today, Ashley and Cody, authored the white paper, Broader, Deeper, Fairer, which is inclusive of the proceedings from the National Head Start Early Childhood Workforce Catalyst Gathering, as well as interviews with many other experts, practitioners, researchers, and the like. These 5 strategies to expand the talent pool in early education presented today may seem unreachable, unachievable, even grandiose, particularly when the resources needed to act have not been identified. However, quote, you have to set goals that are almost out of reach. If you set a goal that is attainable without much work or thought, you are stuck without something or with something below your talent and potential. Steve Garvey, success.com. The field has the talent and the potential to activate these strategies and recommendations. There is no time to wait. The issue is not only that childcare or early childhood care and education is essential, as it has been highlighted during the current nagging stress of the pandemic. The issue is also that we don't have enough individuals seeking this profession, qualified pathways, or resources to support this work. Now, more than ever, building a system of recruitment, credentialing, or certification pathways, retention, and ongoing professional development of early child professionals is urgent. The only time element to consider is this time, which is now, to move forward. I'll repeat that. The only time element to consider is this time, which is now, to move forward together, supportive of one another, supportive of each group or organization or entity that takes on the challenge of testing out the 5 strategies. Perhaps they will be implemented in a variety of different ways, monitored closely, evaluated for success or falling short. We will recognize that there's no one way to solve a problem or achieve success. What may be successful in one community may not be successful in another. So then we adapt to meet the needs of the communities, our constituents, and partners. Boldness and being unstuck comes from stepping up to the challenge and implementing or testing out strategies. That's the fail fast and move on strategy. I'd like to add that we need to reach agreement that trying something is much, much better than continuing to lament about an issue that has plagued the field for decades. We've spent far too much time and energy complaining about the issue without forming an allegiance to collaboratively do something or do some things. Quite possibly, many strategies will need to be tried to create viable solutions. We must be different this time around. We must be in agreement, join together with an organized effort and collaborate, and agree to disagree, but do not let or allow disagreement to stall us or derail us. What will be challenging for all of us is the doing of the work. We are fantastic at discussing the issue, complaining about the early childhood workforce issues, yet actions that are being taken are often invisible and even hidden from view. Actions cannot be siloed or invisible. They must be visible, evaluated, tested out in various communities and organizations, and when there is evidence of success, scaled to serve a broader population of people interested in pursuing the profession, additional education, certification, advanced professional development, but those that perhaps likely are without the means and resources to pursue this field of work. Not one of these is the answer or the only answer. There is no silver bullet that will solve the workforce recruitment, development, and retention issues, or the challenges that we face in finding viable routes to serve this looming issue. Maybe not the 5 strategies identified so far. Perhaps a combination of them are pathways forward. Or could we be so lucky to discover additional innovative pathways and strategies that are already being field tested and have some evidence of success? Quote, "Neither failure nor success is written. The story of our generation will be measured on what we are willing to do." End quote, Ibram X. Kendi. Let's do the work. All of these strategies are indeed a beginning, a jumping off point to a solution-driven approach to early childhood workforce field building. A full press ahead is required of us. There will remain the issue of compensation for this essential workforce. The current early childhood professionals and the new professionals that we will need to recruit will be looking to us to find solutions to this challenge as well. That alone, addressing compensation, will take a full press. My challenge to us today is, let's see how we can stand together, advocate for change. Develop systematic, equitable policies that support and resource a well-educated, well-trained early childhood workforce, dismantling institutional systems of embedded racism that keep out some and advance others. And finally, press for policy and system change that support a well-compensated workforce. I cannot wait to see how we'll do this. It will be risky in some instances, but worth the effort if successful and if it successfully moves us in the new direction. Thank you. Onward.
Thank you, Cynthia, for challenging us to stop dreaming and to start doing, to act now, to push us to try implementation, to fail fast and keep going. I'll be watching the recording and getting those notes back on the top of my pages. I'd like to now introduce Ashley Labetti. Ashley joins us today as the co-author of the report and brings a wealth of knowledge to this work, including from the K-12 sector. She's an associate partner at Bellwether Education Partners, the same organization and author behind Moneyball for Head Start, the preeminent report on continuous intentional improvement in Head Start. Ashley and I are here to share a first look into the report, spending most of our time sharing about the strategies for advancement that are contained in the report. These 5 strategies uncover what could happen, not what should happen. It's up to us, all of us here, to be bold, like Cynthia shared. Please remember that after our conversation, we'll be answering questions that have come in throughout today's conversation. So don't forget to share your questions with Megan in the chat. Ashley, it's all yours.
Thank you, Cody. Hey, y'all, as Cody said, my name is Ashley. Cody and I are going to get into the very exciting content of this work. But before I do, I want to spend a few minutes on context. So at a very high level, our goal was to explore how early childhood educator preparation could be improved for educators themselves, but also for the children and families they serve. So Cynthia previewed this and Cody just mentioned it, but our charge was to outline aspirational strategies for improving educator preparation and an action plan for doing so. When we talk about educator preparation kind of as a whole, we're referring to 3 types of content. So first, kind of formal coursework. So that's the content that's credit bearing, often housed within an institution of higher education, generally as part of a degree granting program. Prospective educators can enroll in formal coursework as part of their pre-service preparation in degree granting programs. Current educators also do so as part of like in-service professional learning as a way to improve their practice or obtain a degree. I realize that a lot of this actually is probably review for most of you, but sometimes preparation means different things to different people, so our framework feels helpful at this point. So the second thing to note is that we talk about practice-based training, student teaching, clinical practice, field experience, depending on how you want to call it. But again, most often completed as part of a degree granting program alongside formal coursework. In practice-based training, educators learn often under a mentor teacher in an early childhood classroom. Ideally, this takes place in the type of setting educators currently or will teach in, as well as, again, ideally with specific populations of children, such as children with special needs or dual language learners. So in theory, practice-based training gives educators the opportunity to immediately apply lessons from their formal coursework to the classroom. And then finally, we talk about, again in the paper, in-service professional learning. So the work that builds educators' skills after they enter the classroom. And we include coaching and mentoring, workshops and training, conferences, professional learning communities, and kind of going back to the point that this is not a perfect framework and preparation means different things, but formal coursework or practice-based training in the pursuit of upskilling can also be considered in-service professional learning. So those are the 3 kind of buckets that our strategies focus on. Again, we'll talk about the strategies in just a minute, but a couple things to note. First, our strategies, as we suggest them, are worth exploring, but they have to be considered in the context of evolving circumstances, and they must be responsive to pressing needs. So what I'm basically trying to say is we're not trying to tell you or the field what to do, right? We're thinking about these strategies as guidance of what should be done to improve early educator preparation in the absence of knowing exactly what to do. Our strategies are also a combination of ones that we are designed new from our work together, as well as improving existing ones, and then implementing them with fidelity at scale. So some of the pieces of our strategies already exist at local or regional levels, but have yet to proliferate systematically or kind of become part of the field's institutional knowledge. And Cynthia mentioned this as well, but truly improving educator preparation requires that these strategies and others be pursued simultaneously and be designed to reinforce, not to compete with one another. So before I hand over things to Cody, one more thing to note that as we talk about preparation, I assume you're all wondering, but we don't take a stance on whether or not early educators should have a bachelor's degree. This is a very, very thoroughly discussed debate within the field. And so our read of the research is that educators should have some form of high quality post-secondary training, but that no specific credential or degree guarantees that an educator will be effective in the classroom. So our strategies don't have the explicit goal of degree attainment, but nor do we exclude pathways to bachelor's degrees. Okay, that's my context. Cody, turn it back to you.
Wonderful, Ashley, thanks. We wanted to begin the conversation about the content of the paper by starting with the principles that informed this work. Each of these principles is reinforcing of one another and carry throughout all recommendations and strategies that we talk about in the report. Where do they come from? In summer of 2020, the Early Childhood Workforce Catalyst, hosted by the HeadStarter Network in collaboration with Bellwether Education Partners and Community Building Institute, convened dozens of forward-thinking early childhood researchers, early childhood educators, practitioners, policymakers, philanthropists, and the like to spark new ideas for improving early educator preparation. These principles were developed based on what we heard that day, and they're each core to this paper, running throughout every section and driving the recommendations. So we'll take a moment to go through each of these 5 principles. First, and without question, we must champion equity. The work we do to support the evolution of workforce preparation must unequivocally promote equity. Racial equity, in particular, must drive all future efforts to improve early educator preparation by ensuring that change does not negatively affect minority populations, nor give way to unintended consequences. But rather, change must uplift and support the advancement of minority populations. Unequivocally, advancing equity needs to be the driving force behind approaches and efforts to improve early educator preparation, centering both educators as well as the children and families who are served by the programs. The second principle you see here involve educators, which, especially as we look to make changes to the system, we must orient around educators' experiences and insights. The people who are going to be affected by these strategies, by these changes, must be involved in genuine ways from start to finish, from conception to implementation to iteration. Third, professionals and paraprofessionals must be compensated for the work that they do. We must not ask educators to pause pay for training. This is particularly true for veteran educators who should not lose ground or wages while they sit on the sidelines to acquire new credentials to meet new requirements. The fourth principle here, credit experience, was one that we heard loud and clear at that summer event. This is what is sometimes referred to as show what you know. For experienced educators, spending time in courses that are aimed at developing skills that they frankly already have, true opportunities for beneficial professional development are delayed. So what we must commit to is that being able to demonstrate the necessary competencies should be what's valued. The final one here asks us that we consider individuals' needs, accounting for the varied circumstances of those who participate in prep programs. That may mean providing childcare, meeting childcare needs, providing flexible timing for class, financial aid, and a whole range of other supports. But the bottom line is that we must be human. Each of these principles was front and center in our thinking as we conceptualized the strategies that we're about to dive into. So without further ado, let's get into the ideas. Our first strategy focuses on the need that those at that summer event shared to quote unquote create a national credential. In early childhood, the Child Development Associate, or CDA, is a competency-based credential grounded in content that is most relevant and necessary for the profession. All lessons are practice-based. To earn a CDA, one must complete training, work experience, and pass an exam across foundational competencies that are needed to be an effective early childhood educator. The value of the CDA is widely recognized across state policy and federal policy. Because of that, the CDA serves as a high potential lever for improving early educator workforce preparation. So that's where we started. We start with what we know works best and has the biggest footprint as a national credential. And what we came to is a two-part strategy to advance preparation. First, we should name and assess the quality of CDA options. And second, we should develop a second national credential that layers on top of the CDA to develop further expertise among educators. The first, which is name and assess quality, we propose to develop a single national repository of CDA training options. The goal here is to support potential candidates in navigating their options, including particularly which programs will result in college credits. In the go-to one-stop shop, there would be a range of information on CDA options and indicators to support educators or supervisors in their selection. This information might include, for example, feedback and ratings of the CDA professional development specialists, pass rates on first exam attempts, and other information about credit articulation. Such information would be placed in a prominent place that allows candidates to make side-by-side comparisons of different options, empowering those to make their best choices for themselves. Admittedly now, the second part of this strategy is where things get a little bit more interesting. For this part, we proposed developing a second national credential that layers onto the CDA experience to create a truly alternate pathway into the profession. Ultimately, it would be the goal that the experience gained during the second credential and the guaranteed quality that comes with it would be held in equal esteem to four-year degrees. In the report, we call it the Child Development Professional Credential, or CDP, which would require training and preparation beyond what is already required by the CDA, building and adding new competencies, which we discuss in great detail in the report. The goal is to leverage the reputation and the portability of the current CDA to build an alternate pathway further into the profession. Google has been successful in doing this with certificate programs, and their work offers somewhat of a path forward. Those are the very high level components of the very first strategy to build a national credential that was intended to answer the call from Catalyst participants this summer. For the second strategy, strategy 2 answers a totally different call. At that summer event, one of the core questions was, what if we build a super university that's retrofitted and tailored to what early educators really need to be effective? In this paper, we call this endeavor Premier University. At its root is the course content. All courses would be relevant, competency-based, project-based, and credit-bearing. Effectively, they're hands-on and they're relevant to the work at hand. The really inspiring news here is that so much of the work has been done to lay the foundation for such a super university. This is what powers this particular strategy forward. An organization called Early Edu, shout out to Gail Joseph if she's on the line for her work at the helm there, curates ECE relevant courses for use by individuals and use by universities. So we propose to complement that work with general education requirements that frankly wouldn't be torture or irrelevant. Instead, general education courses would be designed so that educators build the relevant skills they need through early childhood examples. So for example, educators would work with student level data in a statistics course. What remains would be the need to provide affordable access at scale and achieve that last principle, to quote unquote, be human. This work is also already being done. Partnerships like the work at Southern New Hampshire University and an organization called Duet make access and success of individuals core to their work. Career and success advisors aren't last-ditch efforts with SNU, SNHU, and Duet. They partner with each individual student from the very beginning, and they're equally prepared to support traditional and non-traditional students, offering flexible options to meet different needs and timing. They also share in a commitment to relevant project-based coursework. So what strategy 2 effectively is the marriage of these existing yet currently isolated components to establish premier university. Ashley, I'll pass it to you for strategy 3.
Thank you, Cody. Okay, so our third strategy is about practice-based training. So during the convening last summer, and then as well as throughout our conversations with practitioners and stakeholders, both for this work and other projects, we heard over and over that practice-based training is one of the most, if not the most, important opportunities to support early educator preparation. Again, I mentioned this at the outset, but for the purposes of this work, we're defining practice-based training as any opportunity for an early educator to build their skills and competencies to be effective while working alongside a current educator in the classroom. So our field actually already has a strong defined practice-based training model in early care and education apprenticeships. So EC apprenticeships, as you possibly know, are an earn while you learn model. So educators are compensated for their work in the classroom, including gradual pay increases as they achieve key milestones, and then they simultaneously work toward a specific credential. A range of apprenticeships currently exist, and they're designed for a range of people across settings. So prospective or current educators, home-based, Head Start, center, school. In the paper, we have lots of details about apprenticeships, but at a very kind of high level, apprenticeships offer structural elements that support educators' access to and completion of preparation programs. So cohort-based program design is a good example, or access to childcare. Apprenticeships actually also, or apprentices themselves actually also tend to reflect a more diverse pool of candidates than traditional pre-service pathways. So moving forward, we believe that the field must leverage EC apprenticeships to improve early educator preparation. So apprenticeships should be the cornerstone of practice-based training for early educators, and access to them should be expanded. At the same time, we also recommend ways to explore kind of an apprenticeship plus structure. So complementing apprenticeships with additional practice-based training opportunities that reflect practices or structures in other fields. So nursing, for example, nurse interns rotate positions. They build skills in different specialties, and when going back to their original position, then better understand how the content from different types of specialties kind of hangs together. There are similar opportunities to do so in early childhood, again, which we talked about in the paper. So 2 key actions can help move these strategies forward. First, we recommend that EC apprenticeships are supported in accessing existing workforce and labor funding. So right now, the EC apprenticeships receive the majority of their public funding through sources specific to early childhood. Teach scholarships kind of is a key example here. But apprenticeships in other fields have access to other workforce and labor-focused funding streams. Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is a very key example. There are also training programs through SNAP. There are several others through DOL and other kind of workforce training streams. Actually, the Department of Labor recently approved early childhood education as an apprenticeable occupation. Meaning that EC apprenticeships may be able to access those funding streams, but there needs to be intentionality behind supporting apprenticeships in doing so. And then second, this is, I don't know if y'all know this is actually the wrong slide. If you want to go back just one, that'd be great. But the second recommendation here in the second bullet point is, actually, this is not aligned anymore, but we also recommend that the Office of Head Start create a national center focused on the early childhood workforce. There are kind of a workforce-centric national center offers very clear benefits for educators, providers, and children. But in the context of practice-based training, this type of national center could support the spread of apprenticeships through a range of strategies, targeted guidance, technical assistance, capacity building for experienced intermediaries, actually, which already exists. Okay, now we go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so strategy 4 focuses on job-embedded coaching. Coaching has one of the strongest bodies of research among efforts to improve early educator preparation. Individualized coaching, as you know, is increasingly common in early childhood settings. Part of that is a function of local, state, federal efforts. But coaching can mean different things in different contexts. Again, it's kind of this catch-all word that depending on where you are, who you are, it looks different. But in the most effective models, coaching is individualized, intensive, sustained support tailored to educators' specific strengths and challenge areas. The working with one-on-one with coaches over an extended period of time, personal improvement goals, kind of all of this is focused on supporting the educator in developing the skills that they need to develop while leveraging the strengths they have. One of our key recommendations here is that the field kind of explore what we're calling credit-based or credit-bearing coaching models to both build on the strengths of existing models and address current challenges within early educator prep. So in a credit-bearing model, educators receive course credit for their work with coaches. So educators can apply these credits toward degree attainment or other credentials. Kind of in the near term, credit-bearing coaching models would require a partnership between an early childhood provider and an accredited IHE. But again, this goes back to kind of mutually reinforcing strategies. If we're talking about Premier University, which Cody just talked about. But doing so kind of creates this extrinsic incentive for both providers and educators to commit to high quality coaching content and relationships. Again, because coaching means different things to different people, making this kind of model possible and effective requires careful attention to design and implementation. We talk about that again in the paper. But at its core, kind of coaching or credit-bearing coaching is grounded, physically and substantively in the early childhood center, and therefore, or home or school setting, and therefore makes course credit and degree attainment more accessible and attainable. So this also, one of the things we also talk about is thinking through the benefits of coaching as credit-based coaching as competency-based, credit or practice-based, and then directly connected to educators' contexts. Again, 2 recommendations here. First, we recommend a ground-up approach, right? So early childhood providers, local IHEs, developing a partnership to collaboratively design a credit-bearing coaching model. These localized partnerships should be both forward-looking, that is, collaboratively create coaching content that is eligible for credit, and then also kind of institute quality control mechanisms, define coach qualifications, but also be backwards looking or iterative, right? So prioritize continuous improvement and evaluations, and then share that work with the field. And then second, we recommend that states look through or address policy barriers or policy changes that mitigate barriers to credit-based coaching. So a successful credit-based coaching model kind of rests on certain preconditions across higher education systems, teacher certification regulations, and then early childhood funding environments. So states actually need to assess the degree to which current policy hinders or enables credit-based coaching, and then where necessary, implement changes. 2 of the examples that we talk through here or in the paper are articulation agreements between 2- and 4-year institutions and statewide coaching credentials. Colorado has something similar, although not kind of perfectly aligned, but there is a foundation or ways to move forward through existing strategies. Okay, last one, strategy 5. Is connecting in-service preparation to career advancement. So when we look at the research across industries, both within the US and internationally, we see that that opportunities for career advancement support employee retention, satisfaction, performance, But what we also see is that or historically in early childhood and then in education more generally, advancement opportunities have largely been vertical. So that is, educators will kind of advance through their careers through climbing an organizational hierarchy or hierarchy, generally into roles with more management responsibilities and kind of through doing so a pay raise. The challenge, of course, particularly in our context, is that these opportunities take educators, and then most often the most effective educators, out of the classroom and away from children, which is not what we want. So as a result, kind of over the past several decades, early childhood, and again, education K-12 as well, has explored kind of advancement opportunities that keep experienced, effective teachers teaching. Hybrid teacher roles, I think, or teacher leader roles is a common one. So educators remain in the classroom, but also take on kind of the set of complementary responsibilities like mentor teachers. But those aren't necessarily financially rewarded or truly recognized as career advancement. Sometimes they'll come with stipends, but it's not necessarily a sustained pay raise. And then the other part of this is, while hybrid teacher leader roles kind of tangentially support educators' practice, they don't necessarily focus directly on educators' upskilling, and in a way actually still take away or educators' attention away from the classroom. So again, 2 recommendations. Moving forward, we recommend that the field expand existing advancement opportunities for educators. And at the same time, we also recommend that policymakers, the philanthropic community, other early childhood stakeholders look to other fields to explore additional opportunities. Fellowships, job rotations, certifications are key examples. We highlight fellowship or similar advancement opportunities from General Motors and the advisory board in the paper. But at the same time, within the early childhood context, these advancement opportunities should incentivize in-service skill development that improves educators' instructional practice. There are kind of early childhood focused certifications that exist. So the CDA, in some cases, NB, the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, and then subject-specific endorsements that come along with some state teacher licensure requirements. But in addition to these, there is potential for additional recognition advancement opportunities that can be grounded in the instructional competencies specific to early childhood. So then our second recommendation is for early childhood providers. We suggest that providers with capacity support, again, from policy and philanthropy, work to or look at opportunities, look at ways to design advancement opportunities based on in-service professional learning that improves educators' effectiveness in the classroom. And there are actually a few ways to do this with relatively low lift. Again, if you have the capacity, the time to invest in doing so, which we would need to support providers in doing so. But at a high level, the system would recognize educators for investing in their own in-service professional learning. We talk a lot about badges, micro-credentials, certificates, but these things kind of developed in-house, even with a collaboration with a network of other early childhood providers, with a state early childhood association. All of those can provide the foundation for a more comprehensive system. Obviously, ideally, educators would be compensated for this work, as Cody started off with with the principals, but there are ways for providers to institute kind of lower cost recognition, role changes, title bump, additional flexibility, paid time off, or stipends until sustained financial compensation is possible. But the goal here is to look into how we can support and recognize educators while not taking them out of the classroom. So super speedy overview of our 5 strategies. I'm going to turn it back over to Cody.
Wow. Thank you, Ashley. So again, our task was to essentially nurture those brilliant seeds of innovation that had been planted during the Early Childhood Workforce Catalyst event. And it was no small task to flesh out those ideas. And so now we have a lot of information to unpack. With that, I'm going to welcome back Megan, our chat guide, to the conversation to share some of what she's been seeing in the chat and facilitate questions from the audience.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Cynthia, for reminding us that the time is now to collaboratively start doing some things. I saw comments from Hawaii to Massachusetts, pretty much every state in between. So we all feel the urgency. So let's jump right in. But I want to first ask a question that is probably on many people's minds, and that is, like, what makes these actionable? Take, for example, strategy 5. Ashley, how do you envision tackling that in concrete steps?
I mean, we talk about this in the paper itself. I do think this merging or simultaneously pursuing opportunities from ground up and from kind of the state and local level, both seeing if there are ways to, at the early childhood provider level, whether that's on their own or within a network, can explore additional advancement opportunities, while at the same time figuring out what barriers there are to doing so within state and local policy. So the front end kind of requires, or the local level requires more action, but the kind of looking at policy, even at the outset, just requires like the start of a conversation, often through existing relationships and networks.
Okay, there's another, this local angle is come up in a few questions. So I'm just gonna highlight one from Randy, which was, how would the CDA be considered for states that don't currently utilize the CDA widely, like California? Is there a way to coordinate such systems?
Thank you for that question. I also know that Calvin is on the line, and so I would welcome anybody who would like to speak up and unmute yourselves, because there are better experts in the room. Ashley and I were the ones who put the pen to paper, but we had so many conversations with so many people. In short, and you'll see this in the paper too, there's, I believe, 24 or 25 states in the last audit of state policies that accept a CDA as a baseline entry requirement for early childhood educators, whether that's assistant teachers or teachers. Then beyond that, I want to say there's something like 35 states who have it as some form of a requirement in state policy across early childhood positions. So that would now include director level positions and so on. And so the question is clearly coming from one of the states that is in the minority there. And I think one of the important points here is that we need to start chipping away at this in states where it might be more politically or policy-wise more salient. And by creating those paths and charting those paths in some states that are further along, we're opening doors in other states to follow. And so I think that's one sort of high level positioning there. And we say a little bit more in the recommendations of the paper on that. But again, I believe I saw Calvin, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would welcome your comments as well.
Well, maybe Calvin stepped out. We'll put a pin in that, and we'll go on to the next question, which is similar, but about funding sources. It's from Pam. How will strategies consider varying qualifications required by multiple braided funding sources? And I know there's probably a lot of people who on this call who have some experience with that. So again, if you'd like to chime in, please do so. Oh.
Cody, do you want to talk about this just in the context of the CDA and the CDP?
Sure. So at the end of the day, what our goal is to, and I saw plenty of questions in here around the relationship of this work to power to the profession. And so I think to quickly address that as well, we see the work that is, or the ideas that are in this paper as very complementary to the work that the Power to the Profession has been doing. The National Head Start Association was one of the task force members of Power to the Profession. And what this paper's relationship is to that work is that it's meant to energize that same conversation. In our view, these are recommendations that can be pursued collectively. And so when we're thinking about the different requirements that come with braided funding sources, it is our ultimate goal that we have a unified profession, just as Power to the Profession sets out to achieve. And when we have a unified profession, we're more capable and better able to address the competing requirements or layered requirements that can come with layered funding. So at the end of the day, what our goal here is to do this from the ground up, to Ashley's earlier point. We want to begin with the places where it's more politically and policy-wise salient and where we're better able to affect this change, and use that to chart pathways across the systems and to be able to create systems level change from those localized efforts.
I think part of the qualifications funding stream question gets at this like underlying, it's not even a strategy at this point, it's honestly just like a theory of action that we've been talking about for a while, related to understanding the fragmentation across early childhood and identifying ways that there are unintentional barriers, and figuring out how to kind of, where that's the case, reduce the conflict between them. We see this a lot with licensing requirements, and if we're looking at Head Start program performance standards versus or in addition to state requirements and state preschool requirements, there are a lot of places where there are, again, like unintentional barriers that at some point, because they exist across agencies, we haven't taken an intentional look at. And there are just ways to do that. And I think some of that just undergirds the paper generally.
So Ashley, while we have you, there's another question about the considerations for FCC providers in relation to practice-based training. Is that something you care to comment on?
Sure. The conversation around FCC and FFM providers is just really exciting, I think, particularly right now. But I've actually read, we don't talk about this specifically in the paper because it's already pretty long, and trying to get into, we try to keep it at a high level so that we can have these types of conversations about what it looks like in practice. But I've read a bunch actually about opportunities for coaching in particular in home-based environments, and some of the research pulling actually from research on home visiting, on how that would look for supporting early educators within home-based environments with effective job embedded coaching. I think Brandy, I think maybe you asked this, but if you want, I can send you the research that I've just been looking at. But I do think there are ways to look at some of the strategies that we've historically considered kind of center-centric and figure out how they apply and how we should adapt or adopt them in other settings, particularly home-based, particularly kind of the movement around home-based right now.
Okay, gosh, we have so many more questions. So I'm wondering, we do have to hand it back to Cody now. Perhaps will be an opportunity in our follow-up communications to address some of these questions. We'll preserve everything that's in the chat, will be saved and will be answered in one way or the other if we can't get to it now. So thank you so much for the rich conversation. And Cody, back to you.
Thank you, Megan. I would also share that this is the beginning of many conversations. To Cynthia's earlier point, this is the beginning of a collaboration. And so please do keep an eye out to stay tuned in for the later conversations that Yasmina will share at the end of this conversation. So by no means a last chance to participate, and we invite you moving forward. I also want to thank Megan for the good questions, the tough questions from the audience, and thank you to Ashley for bringing your expertise and your time, not only to this discussion, but to the paper itself too. We've been looking at the issue of workforce preparation for several years now, researching the possibilities and identifying unusual players to be able to bring together at that Catalyst event to change the conversation around preparation. We had ongoing support for this work and so much other innovation work from PNC. PNC has made an investment in the value of innovation and made a priority of early childhood. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Janine Fonestock. Janine is the Senior Vice President of PNC Bank and Deputy Executive Director of PNC Grow Up Great, an early childhood education initiative that was launched in 2004 and serves as PNC's signature philanthropic initiative. In this role, Janine manages the 4 components of the Grow Up Great program: advocacy, grants, awareness, and volunteerism. We're lucky to have Janine with us here today and always, and so I'll pass it over to Janine.
Cody, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm honored to join you today on behalf of PNC, a proud and longtime supporter of the National Head Start Association and a foundational partner of the HeadStarter Network. As Cody mentioned, at PNC, like all of you, we share a passion for helping parents and caregivers and educators set young children on a path to success. So to that end, it was nearly 17 years ago that we launched PNC Grow Up Great, which is now a $500 million bilingual program that is really focused on delivering very high quality learning opportunities for young children from birth to age 5. And we really focus in on those young children who are coming from some of our most vulnerable communities. We're so grateful today to NHSA and the HeadStarter Network and Bellwether Education partners for this very innovative and forward-thinking collaborative effort that really redefines in a very strategic and thoughtful manner, not only the ways in which we think about the future of the early childhood workforce, but more importantly, the ways in which we can help to drive change across it. As Cody mentioned at the start today, early education providers have certainly been pushed to the brink, and yet day after day, we continue to be inspired by their amazing and innovative approaches to supporting our children. And so while you and I know a lot of educators are joining us today, we know that these educators and providers are heroes, but their value must be amplified. And so it's this work, what we're talking about today, these efforts and these very specific recommendations that can help set us on a path to change their trajectory. So at PNC, and I know all of you have long advocated that high quality early education is really a proven means for economic and social mobility. And most critical to the early education system is the workforce that sustains it. So today, please know how grateful we are to you for being here to fully understand the opportunity before us, and really for walking away thinking about ways that you can support it, and ideally with the urgency that Cynthia so clearly conveyed earlier in the call. So I just want to remind all of us that it is through the work of early childhood education professionals that we will build stronger and more equitable communities, and that is going to just simply lead to brighter futures for all. So thanks for your time today. Thanks for being here, and Cody, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Janine, for your support today and throughout this work. Now and finally, it's my honor to introduce the visionary behind so much of this work, the one who needs no introduction, Yasmina Vinci. Yasmina brings decades of experience from all levels of early childhood to her role as executive director of the National Head Start Association. In the context of this work, though, she serves on the board of the HeadStarter Network, and from that post, she sets out ambitious visions and challenges for forward progress. As the engine behind this work, I'll now turn it over to Yasmina Vinci to share where we'll go from here.
Thank you, Cody, Ashley, Cynthia, and to everybody who participated in the Catalyst for this really thrilling report. And of course, again, our great thanks to PNC Grow Up Great and to the other funders who want to actually see more terrific, knowledgeable, well-prepared educators who come into the profession in many different ways, who look like the children they teach, who respect and care deeply about the families of those children, and who themselves are valued and compensated fairly. That's what brings us all together. So everybody here, you all put a great deal of thought and effort in capturing the most thrilling ideas and getting them outlined in this report. So the next step which you're probably curious, following Cynthia's directive to stay unstuck and get going. Next step is for each one of us to commit to diving deep into one of the strategies and to begin the experiments that Cynthia mentioned. And then to round off the goal of having the early childhood education talent pool that is best for serving our diverse children and families, we will also be coordinating the work on race and equity in early childhood leadership with our longstanding colleagues at Bright Horizons and the Council for Professional Recognition. Last November, we had another great catalyst with them on the topic of race and equity in early childhood education, and we're eager to join these two very complementary efforts. So how will we do this? We will mobilize work circles, and I saw so many, the sort of the core of many of them just in the chat. We will mobilize work circles to keep these ideas blossoming, but more importantly, to keep actions forthcoming. We want each one of you engaged in the circle where you think you would make, you would like to make most progress through collective action. So then as the first step, your toe in the water, so to speak, be sure to sign up for our newsletter to stay informed and also to showcase your efforts, to learn of upcoming events, to join the work circles of your interest, and to get curated early childhood workforce news. So we will use the email that you used to download today's report to send you the first newsletter, and hope that you will stay subscribed, and also that you will use it to talk with us. And now, just as we heard from Catalyst participants in August, let us hear your parting thoughts. So be sure to share on the chat your ideas, how we can support your work, your needs, your solutions. Give us your ideas. And as you do that, I want to thank the Business Romantic Society, Megan, Tim, and Mark, for making all our events meaningful and memorable, and to invite Mark to again inspire us with his music. So thank you for joining us today and for taking this first step.